All right. Good morning. There we go. Get that image back up on the screen there. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. It's my day today. You will find out why in just a minute. But if you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Now, I want you to remember, folks, the show does not run on freedom fumes, okay? So if you're watching on Rumble, I want you to smash that green $sign anytime during the show to drop me a Rumble rant. It's kind of like throwing me a cold one, 7:30 in the morning. It helps keep the vibes high and the mics on. If you want to go all in, click that subscribe button for $5 a month. Your support helps me to fight the good fight. All right, let's get into it. All right, speaking of monetization, let's see here. Let's go to the live chat here real quick. And we will say, that Liberty Lady says, word on the street, Liberty Dad will be monetized this week on YouTube if he's not already. I am not just yet, but keep it going, folks. Here's the deal. My next metric to make in order for me to be monetized is 3,000 watch hours. I am currently at 2,768. Now, that is not as of today. That is as of the 8th. So they're actually a few days behind. Okay, so I don't know where it technically is at this particular moment. So my assumption is that the watch hours may already be at 3,000 and we just got to wait until they catch up. I don't really know. So if you want to do me a solid, you could always go back and watch some episodes, some old episodes. There's a lot of good ones, right? This is 601. That means there's like 600 episodes. Well, there's technically not 600 on YouTube. I started out initially just doing audio only, and so it was just a straight up podcast, like in the more traditional sense. But we are almost to 600 actual video episodes, so we're pretty close. It's probably somewhere in the range of like 550 or something like that. I don't really know the exact number, but there's plenty of episodes for you to go back and watch. Now, I will warn you, the earlier ones, I was still working out microphone issues, and so the sound may not be that impressive, and I had like an older camera, so I don't look as good as I look today. I mean, I did. You just can't tell because of the camera. So anyway, do me a solid. Get out there and, just listen to some of the old episodes. I talk about a lot of stuff. So, go dig through and find something that's of interest and watch it. Feel free to comment on it. Throw me, say, hey, this was a good episode, or hey, you missed the mark, whatever. Like, those kind of things are important to me. But definitely get out and watch some more of this channel so that we can get monetized, and all of that goes toward making a much better show. All right, so what are we talking about today? Well, we got two things on the schedule. Today is, depending on how you roll, today is either Columbus Day for you or it's Indigenous Peoples Day of you. For you. For me, it's Liberty Dad Day. It's my day, okay? And I'm not going to let you take that away. And you might be tempted to go out and you might be able to defend Columbus's honor or insist that we should honor the indigenous people. But I really, or maybe you would like to discuss the conspiracy that Jews really financed Columbus's trip, or that he was secretly a Jew himself. Whatever the case, I've got you covered. And so I say, let's just call it Liberty Dad Day. Now, what are we talking about? Like, I got to make some sense of this, right? So let's do that. Here we go. Up on the screen, these are my ancestry results. Okay, and I'm gonna tell you about the ancestry, like how we even got to this, in a little bit. So, as you can see, I'm just gonna show you the results first, and then we'll kind of walk through them, and I'll tell you how these are connected to today. All right, so we've got, they've redone it. They used to do it just by like countries. Now they're doing it kind of like by regions, or they kind of like grouping them together. So it's a little bit, they've changed how they've presented it. But they've got the Celtic and Gaelic, Central Scotland and Northern Ireland, some 24%. So I'm just saying, you know, if you piss me off, and just kidding, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to. I'm just note that the Irish have their ways when they get upset. Okay, just know. Anyway, then Leinster, Ireland. I probably shouldn't be boasting about Ireland if I can't even pronounce their name. So we've got 24 and 2% there. So we got 26% over there in Ireland. You think I can I drink? I don't know. I think I could. I should just drink a lot today. Just kidding. I don't drink anymore. And then we got England. And of course, again, they've got it by regions here. So West Midlands, Devon and Somerset, Southeastern England and Northwestern Europe. Then we've got Indigenous Americas. You know what I'm saying? You know, so Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and then the Yucatan Peninsula. So that comprises 20%. So I'm like 24 or 26% Irish. And then England, I've got, let's see, I'm trying to do the math here on the fly. So it looks like 26% also for English, and then 20% Native American. Like, how crazy is that, right? And then let's get the other image up here real quick. All right. So then what we've got is Jewish. That's right. That's right. I'm Jewish, people. Sephardic Jews, 4% in Northern Africa. You know, it's weird. They used to like have me placed in the Spain, Portugal area. But now I guess they've got the Sephardic Jews in North. But the Sephardic Jews were around the Mediterranean-ish area. Then you've got Ashkenazi, all right, 1%. So if you've ever wondered, you're like, man, that DL, he's pretty smart. Well, just saying, 1% Ashkenazi, just saying. Then we've got Northern Africa, just more generic, so that's 3%. So I guess if you ever see me on the show acting a little bit belligerent, you could like clip it, and then you could post it on social media, and then you could be like, how do we fix this culture? Wah, wah. So if you're not familiar with what I'm making a joke about, so a lot of people foolishly, mind you, will take some video footage of black people, you know, acting poorly, right? Like there's like 2 or 3 black people doing something that they shouldn't be doing, you know, maybe being belligerent to somebody or getting in a fight, and they're like, how do we fix this culture? So I'm just kind of making fun of those people, you know, by saying, like, I guess if I get too angry on this show, and you could be like, man, how do we fix this culture deal? So anyway, it's just gibberish, people. Like, right now I'm having a little bit of fun today. Okay. Then we've got Crete. So I guess you could call me a Cretan. I don't think that's quite the same, but just, you know, for fun. Italy, Northwest Italy, you know, a little bit of Italian, 1%. And then the Netherlands, 1%. All right. So let's talk about this. How does all this tie into Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day? So if you go back to the Celtic and Gaelic, which is about 26%, so many Scots and Irish, they later migrated to the Americas during colonization waves that followed the initial European expansion that Columbus voyage made. So he kind of like set things in motion, right? So this is kind of like, and this was within that, you know, when we say later migrated, we're not talking about like Ellis Island later. We're talking about, you know, like earlier than that. So, you know, I've you know, like that's a connection there. You know, like it's a kind of a loose one, I guess. Then we've got England. All right, so England, of course, began its own exploration and colonization of the Americas about a century after Columbus. But what was interesting is that Devon, in particular, was home to early explorers like Sir Francis Drake. So, like if you go back in my lineage, perhaps my lineage includes actual explorers. Like maybe I'm connected somehow. I don't know. I don't have that kind of detail, but it's kind of cool to think about. And then Spain, Spain is implied. If you saw the Northwestern Europe slash England, kind of that, because again, they've moved away from specifying particular countries so much as kind of like maybe doing these regions within these countries. Sometimes they overlap more than one country. So they've got Northwestern Europe, which would have included Spain. And so it's not specifically listed again, but Columbus's 1492 voyage was financed by Spain's Catholic monarchs, so Ferdinand and Isabella. Okay, so got a little bit, a little connection there. And then we've got Mexico, 16%. Columbus's voyages initiated European colonization that eventually led to Spanish control over Mexico. This also that also represents the indigenous and post-Columbian populations that were also shaped by his expeditions as well. And then we have the indigenous Americas, Canada and the United States, 3%, and then the Yucatan Peninsula, which is 1%. So indigenous peoples across America were dramatically affected, of course, by the Europeans when they arrived. You could debate and argue that all day long if you want, whether they were dramatically affected in positive or good ways. I think it's just a matter of which information you decide you're going to run with. At the end of the day, like if you just want to run with any negative stories, then you're going to be like, look, this is so bad. But if you want to run with the more positive stories, you could be like, oh, this is so good, right? It's up to you. But these things connect me again to the pre-Columbian civilizations and their descendants. So, I'm just saying I'm Native American, feather, not dot. Then we've got the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazi Jews. How do they fit in? Well, 1492, the same year that Columbus sailed, was also when Spain expelled its Jewish population. Okay? So when people are like making jokes about the Jews and how they've been, kicked out of all the, like, my people were kicked out of their country once upon a time. All right? And there is some speculation by historians that that some Jews or Jewish financiers might have indirectly influenced some of the early voyages. Like if you're a history buff, that may appeal to you. All right, and then we've got North Africa, Crete. So these regions were part of the trade networks that were connected to Europe, Africa, Middle East, and these were vital in the exploration. So, like if you go back, Thomas Sowell, there's an interesting kind of. I'm not going to get it right because I'm doing this kind of off the cuff on this one, but Thomas Sowell had written that for these voyages to happen, you've got like I think rudders. They were made. They were made and perfected in China. Then you've got math, which we got from India, and so you like when you look at the total cultural influences on the ability to explore and travel, you see that different elements come from different areas. Okay, so I think that's kind of interesting. When we're talking about exploration, like it's not like the Europeans just figured out everything. They didn't figure out math and this and that and all these things that go into the ability to get on the high seas and take a boat and go somewhere, whether you get it right or wrong, right? Like all these different elements came from different cultures. So I think that's worth noting today because people want to kind of like narrow it down to like one country or one particular people. But the truth is, in order for humans to, when we're doing anything more than literally walking from one location to another, when we're traveling with some sort of technology, we may not consider it technology today, but in the early days, it would have been technological advancements. A lot of those advancements were compilations of things that different cultures developed. So it just, and then of course, Italy, I got that 1% just by the skin of my teeth. Columbus was born in Genoa. It's a port city in northwestern Italy. So there's that. Now, the last one, this is fun because I actually didn't realize this. But the Netherlands also won because I was like, Netherlands, how does that tie in? Well, Dutch explorers later followed in Spain and Portugal's footsteps during the Age of Exploration, colonizing parts of the Americas. So got a little bit there too. So basically, at the end of the day, it's not Happy Columbus Day. It's not Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. Or if it is, it's Happy Columbus/Indigenous Peoples Day to me. Okay? Because I've got ancestors on every side of this debate. Okay? Everywhere. Like even some of the conspiracy theories you could throw in there. Like, oh, it was the Jews. Like, got some of that too. All right? From Genoa to Yucatan, my DNA is a map of 1492. So take that, everybody. This is Liberty Dad Day. To heck with your arguments. It's all for me. I didn't even take the day off. So let me tell you let me kind of go into some fun stuff about this. Okay? Because me learning about my ancestry has actually got a fun story. I grew up always just assuming that I was white. Okay? Sounds kind of weird, but you're like, because my mother, she had me when she was younger, like 19 or something like that. And then like around 3 or 4, she met my now father. Okay. So I don't know my biological father. I don't really know the details. Doesn't really matter. So so she met my now father. He adopted me. And so that's the only person I've ever known. So and my mom and my dad are both clearly white, 100%. Okay. So I just kind of assumed that, I'm white too. I'm in a white family. I was born and raised in this family. And then my sister and my brother, who come from my mother and my technically adopted father, I just call him dad because, like if you've been there since you're 3, you're dad, period. So I just call him dad. But just so we're clear on the distinction here, they are like technically half siblings, okay? Although we don't approach each other like we're half. We're just like, yeah, that's my sister, that's my brother, period. And so I just they're both white. I wish I had a picture I'd show it to you and you could be like, oh, wow, they're pretty. They're not pasty white, but they're white, very clearly white. And so growing up, I was just always like, oh, yeah, I'm white. And when I got a little bit older, in, say, maybe my 30s, friends would start making jokes. They'd be like, dude, because I grew a beard. And they were like, when I shaved my head, they were like, dude, you could, like when I would kind of grow it out a little bit, they're like, dude, you could pass for a Muslim. And I was like, don't be silly. And they're like, no, seriously. And then like when I was living in Charlotte, they would joke with me and say, you should dress up like a terrorist on Halloween. And I was like, I'm not dressing up like a terrorist. I was like, because I don't need no drunk redneck to, challenge me on something. I was like, that just seems like just seems like a bad idea. And, today I would probably do it, actually. But back then I was just like, I don't know. I was out trying to party and I was like, I just don't want no trouble. Like, yeah. And so I didn't really think much of it. But then I just started noticing that a lot of people around me didn't really think I was white. And then I started remembering, back in high school, my friends, in that age, late high school, early 20s, my friends would always joke with me and they'd be like, no, but seriously, what are you? And I'd be like, I'm white. And they're like, no, but seriously, what are you? Have you seen that? You've seen that video of the 2 joggers and the guy's talking to an Asian woman. He's like, no, but he's like, where are you from? And she's like, I'm from, like, I think she says like San Francisco or something. He's like, no, but where are you from? And she's like, oh, and go look it up. It's funny. I'm not gonna try, but it reminded me of that when I said this. So my friends would be like, but seriously, like, what are you? And just never in fact, when I was in 11th grade, I think it was 11th grade, I did a lot of drama. Not like engaged in drama. I actually did like real drama, like theater stuff. And I remember we were setting up for one of our shows, and we were putting on stage makeup. And the girl that I was putting on makeup, she was like, oh, you have beautiful eyelashes. And I'm like, thanks. Like as a young guy, beautiful eyelashes is not really what you're looking for, right? I was like, thanks. And then she said, you have high cheekbones. Are you Native American? And I was like, no. I had no clue. Okay. So we get back to our story where I'm starting to like notice more so that people don't really see me as white. And so I ended up, meeting my now wife, and we ended up getting married. And I developed new friends here in Jacksonville. And now I'm just curious. So I was like, you know what? Let me go ahead and take this ancestry. And so I take the ancestry, and then my friends, they were like, well, we should have a party celebrating something, around your DNA. So we decided to call it my ancestry reveal. And so what I did was I took the test, I set up the account, and then I immediately handed over the account to my friends, and I logged out. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to peek. And so then they waited for the results. The results came in, and then they came up with this like little party to have. And so I went over to my friend's house, and they had all these like flags all around on the room on the wall. And so then the flags on the back of them had a percentage. And so there was like, what percentage do you think this is? And some of them would have an actual percentage because they were on the list, and some of them were not on the list. And so then they would have 0%. And so that's when, we got this reveal of my DNA and where I'm from. And so it's pretty, and that's when I first learned. I was like, wow, I am 20% Native American. I was like, holy wow, this is amazing, because I had no clue. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is crazy, because I remember in high school, one of my peers, she actually asked me if I was DNA just based on my cheekbones. And now I was like, that's crazy. Like I had no clue. So it was a pretty neat reveal. Okay. And so like, then I did this. I asked my sister, I was like, do you see me as white? She's like, yeah, kind of, not really. And I was like, what? And then while I was the chair of the Libertarian Party here at Duval County, I was going out and I was finding speakers. And there was a guy, and I promise you, this is a true story. Okay, what I'm about to tell you. It's a true story. Not lying. I'm not making anything up. There's no exaggeration on this show, because I've had too much fun in life to have to exaggerate anything. So I'm meeting a guy. He represents the black community. Okay, and I say that because he actually has an organization that is I can't remember the name of the organization or what it necessarily does. This was like 4 or 5 years ago or something like that. But his organization is intended to assist, like help promote black culture and, ideas around the black community and whatnot. And so I invited him to come and speak, because I thought, you know what, it would be kind of neat if some of these libertarian ideas were to be presented to the black community. When I say black community, I just mean black people. And I know that we want to get away from like, oh, everybody's a monolith. I get all that. I'm just kind of trying to narrow in on what I'm talking about here. So don't give me crap in the comments. So, I was like, I think a lot of these libertarian ideas would be very appealing to people in the black community, because I think they resolve a lot of issues that you hear about in the black community. So, interactions with police, stuff like that. And so I was like, well, first, let's just have a conversation. Let's just bring somebody out and hear his story from his perspective. So I invited him out. So when I went to meet with him, we met at a coffee shop, because I first got connected with him, and then I was like, hey, let's have coffee and let's sit down and talk, and let's just, see if we can't, see if you're a good fit for coming in and speaking at our group, or to our group. And so I sat down, we were at a coffee shop, and I don't know how it came up, but he was like, you're not a brother? And I was like, no. He said, brother, I'm sorry. He said, you're not a brother? And I was like, no. And he was like, wow, he goes, you look like you get. I'm like, come on, man. I was like, now I know I don't look white. I've accepted this, but I look like I could be black. Like, come on now. Like, I'm more like olive skin. I've got an olive tint to my skin, not brownish. It's like a little different, I thought. And so he did this. There's a guy sitting on a different table adjacent to us, and he's like, excuse me, my man. It's a black guy. And so the black guy I'm talking to hollers over at another black guy sitting at a different table, and he's like, what color? He goes, how did he ask? He said, do you think this guy is black or something like that? And he's like, and the guy looks at me, and he's like looking, he's like, yeah, I could see that. And I was like, okay. And so, and this man is not done yet. So then there's a woman waiting for her coffee at the, where they drop the coffee off, and the pickup section. And he's like, "Excuse me, ma'am." He goes, "How many brothers you see sitting here?" And she looked, and she's like, "Two." And he looks at me, and I was like, I'm like speechless. I don't know what to say, because I'm like, okay, I guess I'm a brother now. And then the story gets crazier. It's crazier. So I have a friend that came over, and I was telling him about this. And I was telling him about how, like, I'm not really white. And he's like, yeah. He was like, I kind of picked up on that a long time ago. And I was like, everybody but me knew that I was like, they look at me, they're like, "You're not white, bro." And here I am waltzing around like, I'm totally white, everybody. And then he says to me at my kitchen counter, not lying, not making this up. He says, we can have how did he say it? We can have conversations that black folk have when white folk aren't around. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah. I was like, they're a now, and what I was confused, because I was like, I get that every group says things when some other group isn't around, right? But he presented it as if there are very specific conversations that are had, not just, ranting like, "Oh yeah, those white folk, blah blah blah," or white people going, "Oh yeah, those blackies," whatever, right? Like that's not what he's talking about. And I'm like, wait, what conversations are there? And so he's telling me, like, I don't remember, because this is literally the one and only time, and I don't necessarily remember all the details so well. Like, I remember facts and figures better than I do my own experiences, which is kind of weird, but conversation for a different day. And so I'm like, he's explaining to me that there are conversations that black folk have with black folk that they just don't have explicitly when white people are around. And we're not talking about ranting and raving about the white man, right? Just standard conversations. And I was like, wow. Like, look, I know some of y'all are like, man, I can't wait to be invited to the barbecue. I got invited to the barbecue and then some. Okay, like, I got invited to have private conversations with black folk because I almost kind of sort of look black in some strange way. And this is not, like, I had a coworker. We were actually debating this, and she was like, yeah, you could pass for being black. And I was like, no way. And she's like, I'm telling you. And then she's like, let me show you. And then she pulls up a picture of her mom, because this woman was a little bit darker, so she wasn't quite as, lighter in the melatonin sense as me. And so she puts up a picture of her mom, and then she zooms in like her mom's thigh, and she's like, that's the same skin color that, like, she's comparing my skin color to her mom's thigh. I swear I am not making this up. So then my running joke after that, I was like, more black people think I'm black than white people think I'm white. How crazy is this? Right? So this is the most hilarious, in my opinion. Maybe I'm not delivering it in a humorous sense, but I think this is the most hilarious DNA story that you could possibly have. Maybe not, possibly, but like, this is pretty amazing. Like, when you think about all these elements together. So today I just say, today is LibertyDad Day. Like, I'm not even going to argue anymore about Columbus or the Native American people. Are they noble savages? Were they exterminated? Oh my gosh, they were forced to march. Like, and some of these things were horrible events. Don't get me wrong. Just the reality is, when I go look through history, I see horrible events happening to everybody. Everybody has suffered some horrible event somewhere, right? You got the Ottomans, they were, taking over and killing people left and right. You've got the English, they were doing their thing, colonizing all over the place, like, whatever. You go to Africa, you got tribes fighting there. Native Americans were fighting amongst themselves here. I mean, the Apache were known to be pretty vicious and tough. And that was even before the European colonizers came here, okay? The settlers, or however you want to phrase them. I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care, because it's my day. And I have to spend my whole day with this internal conflict myself. You know what I'm saying? So y'all are going to argue and I'm just going to like argue with myself all day long. Like, no, you're right. No, you were right. That's where I am today. So I just think this is a pretty fantastic story. And I thought, you know what? Why not tell it? Why not have a little bit of fun today? So you have my permission to go out and just be like, yeah, it's Liberty Dad Day. And then when people go, what the hell are you talking about? You can go, well, why don't you go watch this man's show and he will tell you all about it. And then you will help this show grow. All right. So that is my gift to you today. I don't care who you are. You could be white, you could be black, you could be Italian, you could be Jewish, you could be Native American, you could be whatever, right? You could be Asian. You're like, yeah, but there's no, well, my wife is Indonesian, but she's ethnically Chinese, which, by the way, if you do your history, if you do your research, you will find that the ethnic Chinese aren't really well liked over in Indonesia so much. They're the minority. They're not really well liked, and that's because the ethnic Chinese in Indonesia tend to do very, very well. Okay, there's a long conversation we could have about minority groups actually excelling in other countries, but that we're not going to get to. It's for a different day. There's plenty of countries where you can go and look, and you can see minority groups have been super duper successful. And there's good reason for that. So my son now shares my DNA, and then my I have my DNA. My son shares it. He shares my wife's. So in my family, we basically represent half the planet. Okay, so that's where we are. We're like half the planet practically. So I just thought it was fun. And by the way, just in case you were wondering, you're like, well, how do you know that your mom doesn't have any, like, how do you know it all comes from your dad or whatever? Well, and I don't know if I said that earlier, but when I did the DNA results, my sister also did Ancestry, and she has exactly 0 Native American. 0. She got none. Now, maybe I can go back and look. They've been changing it. Maybe there might be a little bit. But when I last looked, she had 0, which meant I got all of mine from my biological dad. And if I've got 20%, well, then you can only get a max of 50%. So therefore, my biological dad had to be at least 40%, right? He could have been more, but he had to be at least 40% Native American in order for me to get 20%. Okay? That's how it works. He could have been more. It's possible that he could have been 50%, and I only got that 20%, like, the 20 percentage points. Like, that could be how it works. But, all of my Native American comes from my biological father's side. All right? So I know this because I got to see my sisters and my cousin. He did his, and I got to see his. And my cousin and my sister are pretty close. I mean, obviously, he's got a different dad than she does. So, but they both, their moms are sisters. So that's how they share that lineage there. So I know, I know, I have a lot of knowledge about my DNA and, like, how it compares to at least my sister and which side of the family I get some of this on. So it's just pretty cool. So, and yeah, I get it. Yeah. Give your DNA. Somebody else has it. They're going to sell it. The CIA, blah, 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 blah. Look, I was in the military, so the government's already got me. You know what I'm saying? Like, they've taken blood. They got me. I might as well go out and get some of this info because the government already got it. I might as well have at least a bit of it too. All right, so let's hit the chat here. Let's see what you guys are chatting up about. Let's see here. Yep, that Liberty Lady. Look, there's a beer right there. There's a drink for me, right? Because it's my day. All right. So there we are. Let's see here. Yep. You could do that. You could put an old episode on YouTube. If you're like, this episode sounds terrible because he didn't have his audio together, and it looks terrible because he had a crappy camera, at the time, you could just go put it on and just walk away, go do some chores, whatever, go play some video games, whatever you go argue with people about whose day this should be. Okay. Make sure that you plug this show and say it's Liberty Dad's day because he's got the DNA to prove it. He has the ancestry. He's got receipts. I came with ancestry receipts. Let's see, what else? Seems like the litmus test right now is, since you're Jewish, you kiss the wall and take AIPAC money if you're ever running for higher office. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create my own damn wall if I ever run for office. I'm going to create my own wall and be like, you have to come and kiss my wall before you donate money to me. I mean, I'm probably not going to get elected if I do that, but I might. That's my thought. That's my off-the-cuff thought today. Today I'm having fun. I say what I want. Look, I say what I want on any given day, but I'm especially going, it's like my birthday plus. So therefore I can just say whatever I damn well please today. And I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to have fun. This explains a lot. This explains a lot here. That Liberty lady's like, my mother was 100% Sicilian. So now I understand why she stands on my neck so much. I get this. Okay. I'm more getting rid of all holidays unless government employees don't get paid for the day off. Yeah, that's true. Like, I don't mind holidays. Like, on my priority list, holidays are pretty low. Like, I don't really care. Should we celebrate this or that? It's really going to be about who's in power and, whether or not, how angry it makes how many people. That's really what it ends up being. We're not making these holidays on any sense of objectivity. Maybe once upon a time we did, but we're not now. Now we're just like, oh no, we got to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day because Columbus was a bad guy. I read his journal one time. I read one page of his journal and I knew that he was a blah, 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 this and that, right? This is where we are today. So people aren't coming at this objectively. And to be honest with you, the easiest answer would just be to have both. Because look, Columbus was a major figure in our country. Like, not in our country, but in our country's origin. Okay? He's a major figure. So are the Native Americans. I don't see why we just don't have 2 days. Just make 2 days. Why fight over... Like, isn't it kind of weird that, like, in the 15th century, we were fighting, and then today in the 21st century, we're like, nah, we ain't done yet. We still gonna fight this. We're not fighting it with, like, swords and arrows and guns and muskets, right? We're just gonna fight it over, like, holidays. And we're gonna be like, no, this historian is right. No, this book tells you everything you need to know. No, you need to listen to this musician, blah, blah, blah. Stop fighting. Just take another day and just call it the Indigenous Peoples Day, or LibertyDad Day. Just end the argument and be like, since you two can't get along, it's LibertyDad Day. And he will take all the arrows for you. Let's see. What else we got here? Oddsman says, I'm an Elizabeth Warren Cherokee. No connection to the tribe, but the U.S. Census, as the Japanese know, does not lie about such things. That's correct. Census. By the way, that's an interesting point that you bring up about the census. Just because it's a political show and I'm talking about groups and stuff like that, our government doesn't belong having this kind of information. So when you talk about Palantir and all these other, entities, all these programs and stuff that like consume data and store it and hold it and blah, 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 like we should aim to get rid of it. Whether we're Japanese, whether we're, Italian, whether we're Native American, whether we're Jewish, like all of these groups have a reason to say the federal government of the United States does not belong having mass information about people. But I'm definitely more than Elizabeth Warren. She was like, what, 1/1024 or something like that? 1/1000th, basically. Well, I'm 20%, so whatever she got, I should get more of. Let's see. I think that's it for the comments. Let me see, make sure it's not on Facebook or... okay, so we're good on the comments here. All right, folks, let's take a intermission, and then we will come back, and we will talk about a ruling that I discussed on social media and got some parts of it wrong, and what parts I believe I still got right, and why that's of any importance. So let's go to intermission. We'll be right back.
The day I got cited, I was blindsided.
I couldn't believe that I was in America. I left a place where that stuff happens, but not here. Here, this is the land of opportunity.
I didn't do anything wrong.
I just couldn't believe it. I didn't do anything wrong.
You think that you're doing things the right way. You think that you're a law-abiding citizen.
And they said I was under arrest for braiding hair, and they took me to jail.
They seized a little over $100,000 out of my business account here. Took 13 years to get it and less than 13 seconds, I guess, to take it away.
I remember my attorneys telling me, most people don't win against the government.
Because I know now that we have more than just a chance. I know that we're going to keep our homes.
If we win here at the U.S. Supreme Court, it makes a difference for my girls and for so many other families.
I'm fighting back because I don't want to have a lot of other people have to go through the same thing I'm going through with their property getting seized.
We changed the laws so that everybody else can be treated fairly.
I want the opportunity
To operate my legal business.
To practice my craft.
To meet the needs of my community in an innovative way.
And someone has to stand up.
All right. Love that group. I follow some of their lawyers online, and they do great work defending people literally against the government. What's really cool is they will be on social media and they will see a story and they're like, hey, I'm with the Institute of Justice. I would like to represent this person. Somebody please help me get in contact with them. And I think that's a good thing. So thank you to all the team members at the Institute of Justice for the work that you do. So, all right, let's talk about rulings. Sounds weird, but I love reading rulings, and I like reading some of the legislation. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a guy. I'm a guy that reads, and I try to make heads or tails. And I wanted to kind of point out this time over the weekend where I got something somewhat wrong, but I think overall the foundation of what I was saying was still accurate. So let me put this up on the screen here. So I saw this comment here, and it says, Guatemalan man overstays his visa and files for asylum. He is subsequently arrested for DUI. Federal judge says he cannot be detained by ICE because it would impair his ability to go to trial on the state DUI charge. That seems to turn the supremacy clause on its head. Okay? Now, just as kind of a little additional background for you, the way that our asylum process works, once you come to the U.S., you have 1 year to apply for asylum. And after you apply for asylum, then you go through the process, and the process could last a few years. Like, I've got some friends that came here legally and applied for asylum, and they're still going through the process. I interviewed one of them in my immigration episode. I can't remember the number. I'll look it up here maybe in a minute. But I interviewed him a while back, and that was a great conversation. So the way this works is this Guatemalan man, he came here legally, then he overstayed his visa. Overstaying your visa is a civil crime. It's not a criminal. So it's not criminal, it's civil. Okay? It's a civil violation. And then in between, before he had went to work out whether or not he could actually get granted asylum, he ended up getting a DUI. Now, I don't know the details of his DUI necessarily. So, like, was he just barely over the limit? Was he just smashed beyond belief? I don't really know. Okay? But that's not really relevant either. Okay? That is a crime. And people should be punished for it. I agree. Like, you should not be driving drunk. Period. So now the question is, okay, what happened to him? Well, ICE, when he went in for his arraignment for his DUI, they said, okay, you don't seem to be a flight risk, so we're basically going to let you go, and you have to come back and we'll deal with, we'll have an actual trial for your DUI. and he left, and then ICE immediately detained him. And so then he basically says, okay, well, while I'm in detainment, if I don't go back for the DUI, that's going to cause problems. And so the issue here is that if like there's any kind of judgment in regards to the DUI, then it could seriously impact his claim for asylum, which is he's trying to get. Now, mind you, the man did come here legally. He came over here, I believe, on not an HB1, but or H1B. He came over on some other form of, I believe, workers visa. Okay, so he was here legally. He just overstayed. Okay, so it's a different kind of situation than what we normally talking about, because we're normally talking about people that come here legally, and what are their intentions and so on and so forth. So this guy at least had the intention of coming over here the right way, and then just overstayed for whatever reason. And I don't know the details of why he overstayed. Did he get fired? Yeah, I don't really know. I don't know those details. Okay, and so then I retweeted this person after reading through, and this is what I said. I said Rodriguez has a DUI charge, which is criminal, and overstayed visa, which is civil. ICE is leveraging detention to strengthen their case. Habeas release doesn't violate the Supremacy Clause because it's due process versus Supremacy Clause, not state versus federal. So the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, what that says is the highest law of the land is the Constitution. So everything has to be in deference to that. Okay, so if you have a state law that conflicts, right, this state law loses. That's what it's about. So what I'm saying is, here's like, okay, well, the argument is that the Supremacy Clause is violated by the federal judge. And I say, no, it's not, because this is an issue of due process. This is an issue of this person being able to fairly argue their case. And if it's such that, and then try to walk with me through this, okay? So I want you to imagine you come here legally, your visa runs out, you apply for asylum, okay? So now you're in this process, which can lead you to a legal place, a legal standing. So you could actually go through the process. You could come here legally, apply for asylum, and then go through the process and get legal status here. Like, that can happen. That's part of our legal system. It's how it works. It's how it's designed. It's convoluted, but it does work that way, okay? And so this man comes here, he applies for asylum, and between the time that he applied for asylum and the time that he goes to plead his case for asylum, he gets busted for a DUI, okay? And then they release him, say, hey, come back, and then ICE, they arrest him. So now they're detaining him. And he's like, well, if I lose my DUI case, then that's going to be leverage against me when you guys are saying, hey, we're going to deport this guy and I want to challenge the deportation. Because then they can say, well, look at this guy. He's an he's an alcoholic or whatever they might say. Okay? However they might do that. And so my concern is like, hey, I want to make sure that everybody gets their proper due process. So if he believes that the DUI charge was illegitimate for whatever reason, like any American can do, right? Like, that's how our system works, then he should be able to challenge that. And that's critically important in this particular case, because if the DUI charge, can be used against him in the proceedings for his deportation, then the due process would say he has to be able to fight that first before we get, right? So it's a matter of order. It's like, which one comes in which order? Well, you can't, it's harder to fight the deportation if it's built on the fact that you have a DUI conviction against you where you didn't get to fight the DUI conviction. So that was my concern, okay? And that's why I'm saying, like, they're leveraging this detention to strengthen their case. And you might remember back in one of my prior episodes when I was talking about Trump and, I think it was the episode Trump versus due process. And I was talking about how the Trump administration leveraged time and procedure to their advantage to deport people from the United States to El Salvador to CICAT, the prison for terrorists. And my objection to that was they didn't get the due process to challenge the claims of the United States government. And so what I always want is that if the United States government says this person, whether they're a legal immigrant, an illegal immigrant, or whether they're a citizen, if they say this person has done this thing and therefore should be punished in this way, I think that person should always be granted due process to challenge that and say, no, I'm not the right person, or no, you have your facts wrong, or whatever, right? That's what when people get mad at me, they get mad at me because they're like, well, you're just trying to defend, illegal immigrants. You want rapists and murderers here. And I'm like, no, that's not what I want. I want this clear delineation between government and the people that it's overseeing. And I want the government to operate with the proper constraints that were put into the Constitution on purpose so that it cannot become tyrannical. The way that I protect my future liberty, my son's liberty, my wife's liberty, your liberty, all you citizens that are watching me right now, right? The way that I protect yours is to protect people that maybe are not citizens or maybe are citizens, right? I don't want precedent for future bad things to happen because this is very much you give them an inch, they take a mile, right? You allow it today, the U.S. government later comes along and says, well, okay, in this case, it's not quite the same. It's a little bit different. And so then they make the argument and they say, well, because in case A, we were allowed to prosecute this person or punish this person. Case B is a little different, and it's only a few steps forward. We should be allowed to punish them or prosecute them as well, right? And so then they build off the precedent that's been set. That's how our legal system works, is through precedent. And that's why when you read a ruling, they will cite various court cases. They'll be like, oh, in this court case here, they determine this. In this court case here, they determine this. And because of this, we either agree or disagree with, what the plaintiffs are arguing here, right? So that's how it works. And that's my goal, is to read through these things and say, start with the presumption of due process. Is due process happening? Whether I think the person was right or wrong, right? Because DUI, you should not be driving while you're drunk, okay? But again, I don't know any of the details about this DUI. So I can't even make an argument and say, well, based on the details, like if I could see the police report and the guy was driving and just crashing into vehicles, I'm going to make an extreme example just to make the point here, and he's crashing into vehicles, and then they pull him over. He stops, and he gets out, and he's wobbling all over the place. He's like, and he's slurring his words. He's like, hello, Ossifer, how are you doing? Blah, 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 right? And he's doing all that, and they're like, okay, this guy's really wasted. He is trashed, and they put all that information into the police report. That's a big deal, right? And contesting that, like, while he should be able to contest it, in that sense, I would say, good luck, right? Because it seems pretty convincing that you were well beyond. But if they pull him over and they're like, I smell alcohol, sir. And he's like, yeah, I had 2 drinks. And they tested his blood alcohol level. And his blood alcohol level is like maybe 0.1 over or something, very, very minor amount, just enough just to get him over the threshold, right? And maybe he wants to argue that. Now, technically, that's illegal. I get that. But if there's an argument to be made, if it's that small and if he was driving relatively safely, that, he could make an argument against that. And at least enough to hopefully win or in some way position himself to still be able to argue that, yes, he is somebody that America would want in their country. Okay? And you might say, well, Dale, why you would want somebody like that? Not necessarily. I just want him to be able to plead his case, to make the argument, right? Because, again, I don't know the facts of the DUI. It could be that he was trashed. We say, yeah, you, dude, if that's how you're going to act in this country, get out, right? I get that, okay? But, again, without knowledge of anything, because there may be information in this story of him with his DUI that would convince me, yeah, we don't want to prevent him. We don't want to deport him based on this. We got to find something else. Okay? There may be information. I just don't know what that information is. So I say, hey, he should be able to present that information and make his case. And maybe he'll win, maybe he'll lose. And if he loses, fair and square, right? And if he loses his immigration case, fair and square. That's all. That's all I'm asking for, okay? So I said, hey, this doesn't violate the supremacy clause because it's due process for supremacy. Due process is your your Fifth Amendment, okay? You have the right to due process. So this is basically federal versus federal, not state versus federal. So this is why I say it's not a violation of the supremacy clause. So then I go and I try to make a hypothetical so that people understand it in the context of a citizen. I said comparable hypothetical against a citizen. Imagine a citizen is detained by the IRS on charges of tax evasion. Meanwhile, that person has a pending civil lawsuit against their employer for unpaid wages under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Okay, so the FSLA. And then I said, imagine that his detention causes him to miss the FSLA hearing and his case is tossed. So in this case, he's not convicted, it's just tossed. It's like, oh, you don't even want to show up. Well, then could the IRS use that dismissal against him later on and say, well, he didn't show up and the case was dismissed and he's of bad character, and this goes to show that he was filing a frivolous case against his employer and that he wasn't paying his taxes, and this is all deliberate, and so therefore this kind of shows his character and kind of strengthens our case that he indeed was evading taxes on top of, these facts that we have. Like, here's the money that he made, here's the money that was paid to us. So clearly you can see that he didn't pay the appropriate number of taxes. And based on this other information, it was probably very deliberate. He can't even argue that it was a mistake and ask for leniency, right? Do you see the point that I'm making? So then I said the IRS then uses the dismissal to claim his civil case was frivolous and uses that to strengthen their case that his tax evasion was intentional. So this is my concern, again, that we're not giving people proper due process to challenge things that might be used against us. That's my whole issue here. So then, this is interesting. Somebody comes along and they go, your hypothetical isn't all on fours. And I was like, wait, what? And so I read, and they're quoting somebody from the original post who's responding to somebody else, not me. And they say, how does a federal judge not know there is no such thing as a default criminal conviction? If he continues to be detained, his DUI case will be stayed until he is brought before the state court. Oh, okay. So now this is new information to me, okay? Because I'm like, well, okay, then if he's not going to... So in my hypothetical, the case could be, in theory, tossed. I presume that's still correct. Nobody has corrected me. In my original assessment of Rodriguez being convicted, because that was what I was aiming at. I was like, okay, well, if this guy gets, if it's an automatic conviction because he doesn't show up, then that conviction then can later be used by the Trump administration to say this is why we should deport the guy, okay? But it turns out that the conviction cannot be, okay? Like it can't be, because there's no automatic conviction for failure to appear. So if he fails to appear, then, and I looked it up, I did the research, and I was like, oh, okay. So it turns out that's not the case. It's not the case that he's going to be convicted. So you might think, well, DL, you're totally wrong. Your whole argument is tossed out, right? So here's what I said. I said the hypothetical doesn't rely on a conviction, but rather losing a case, which in turn is used against them. But I stand corrected on the conviction in the actual case in question. And I said, as I understand, failure to appear still poses problems which impedes seeking asylum. So my understanding is that the failure to appear still becomes part of the argument that the government's like, well, this is why this person should be kicked out, because they failed to appear. I still could be wrong on this. Okay. And then I said the ultimate issue, which I believe holds firm, is that ICE appears to be leveraging procedure at the expense of civil liberties, right? So in any way, shape, or form, when they're arguing, they could argue and say, well, he has a DUI charge against him. Now, they can't make the conviction claim, but they can say there's a charge here. And part of deporting somebody talks about their character. Are they somebody that we want? That's what's in the laws, whether you like it or not. Okay? And so if they can in any way use this DUI charge against him, then I would argue this still remains firmly within the due process versus supremacy clause. Okay? And what I mean by that is that's the debate that you're basically having. Did this person get the proper due process? And, so it's federal again versus federal. So we're still not looking at a state versus federal law. And I said, if I'm reading this incorrectly and judges are incorrect, sharp lawyers across X should clarify. Instead, we're seeing activist judges' arguments. Okay? And then I went on and somebody else came along and they said, if the state court mistakenly were to charge him with FTA, failure to appear, it would be dismissed once detention status was made known to the court. Civil and criminal courts are vastly different. I know zero about the case. On its face, sounds extreme for overstaying a visa. Weak argument, though. Fair enough. Maybe I do have a weak argument, okay? But if you can see where my argument is working, then I think this is the conversation that we should have. And the reason I'm making this argument is because I do believe that if you look at the Abrego Garcia case, that was absolutely one where they tried to use procedure to their advantage, because they arrested this guy. He was at a Home Depot. He got arrested. He got detained, I think, and then let go. But they arrested him because they had documentation of him. And they said, okay, let's go find this guy. So they found this guy, and then they arrest him, and then they go deport him. And then what happened, you might remember, in the Abrego Garcia case, it was very clear. They came out and they said, we're deporting this guy. He's part of MS-13. All this information says so. He got picked up at a Home Depot hanging out with other MS-13 people. Okay? There was some dispute on whether or not all those people were actually MS-13 or whether he was MS-13. And we've made fun of, like the president and others who, worried about the tattoos on his fingers and whatnot. And so in that particular case, which was very interesting, as soon as there was pushback, you had Trish, I can't think of her name, but she works for the administration. And then you also had Pam Bondi and, other people from the administration. They came out and they were like, he is not a Maryland man. He is a illegal immigrant. He's MS-13. He's a human trafficker. He's, what else did they claim of him? He's a human trafficker. He is, there were a couple of other things. Well, this human trafficking and some other things came about after the uproar over sending him to CCOT, okay? Because if somebody's here illegally, okay, the real question is not so much can we deport them. We have laws that say you can. But the question is, should we deport them to a terrorist prison? No. Like I might be willing to accept, okay, our laws currently say, I disagree with them, but the laws do currently say, if you're here illegally, you can be deported back to your home country. Okay, I get that. I accept it, right? I don't like it, but I accept it. And I've talked about this before. I want violent criminals deported, and you can even deport them to a prison. I'm okay with that, right? And then people that can demonstrate that they are the kind of person that we want coming here, other than them either coming across illegally or overstaying a visa. If you exclude those two items, because those are basically administrative crimes, there's no other crime there happening. I know some of my libertarian peers out there will be like, oh, it's property rights. They can go kick rocks. They're wrong. Okay, it's not a property rights violation. Okay, and that's if one of them wants to challenge me, we can come on the show and we can have that debate. Okay, but I do not see it as a property rights violation for somebody to just simply come over here or to stay longer than they were permitted. Those are administrative crimes. Those are basically paperwork crimes. Okay, so if you set those to the side and then you look and say, what has this person been doing here? If they can show that they have otherwise been engaging in American life as we would expect of any immigrant, that means they go to work, they have a job, they stay out of trouble, for the most part, right? I mean, Americans get into small trouble here. Like if you get a speeding ticket or, you had just a little bit too much to drink and you thought you were fine, but technically you went over, I'm willing to have a little bit of grace in those situations because that's what many Americans do. And we also seek grace in those situations. So I'm like, if we can seek grace, then we should be willing to give other people grace. Otherwise, why should we ask for it, right? If you get busted for a DUI, you should not be able to say, if you think that somebody should be deported just because they have a DUI, even the most minor variant of a DUI, in other words, they were just barely over, okay, then fine. Make sure that when you get a DUI, if and when you get a DUI, that you do not say, well, it was my first offense, Your Honor. Can I have a little? Nope, no leniency. You get the punishment that's due to you. If that's the game we want to play, then play it evenly with everybody. That's what it means to treat people equally under the law. So either we mean it or we don't. That's where I stand on this. So getting back to this case, so I look and I say, if we can see that otherwise, other than coming here illegally or overstaying, if we see that they're otherwise the kind of person that we actually want and can be a contributing member of society, then I would argue those people we should actually just grant amnesty to and move right along. And we should probably make our process, our immigration process, far easier to work with, okay? And then we can focus our resources on people that are coming here and maybe they're showing that they're not going to be a contributing member of society. If you can show me that an immigrant came here and they've been here illegally for, like, say, I don't know, 10 years, and they're not really holding down a job, and let's say that they're just collecting welfare. Let's say they steal somebody's identity or they get a fake one or whatever, and they're collecting checks, right? You're not going to get much argument from me to deport that person, okay? But if you've got a person that's otherwise been doing what I expect my neighbors to do, then yes, you're going to get an argument out of me. And if they're a violent criminal, there's definitely no argument there. Kick them out. Like, if you came over here and you violently assaulted or harmed somebody, get rid of you. And the worse the crime, the more willing I'm going to be to say, send you to CCOT, the El Salvador prison, right? I know Bukele is like really excited about his prison. He wants to get everybody from all over the world, or at least the U.S., to go in there. Okay, fine. Send violent criminals there. I'm okay with that. Okay, so this is where I am. But in order to do all this, in order to have this kind of functioning society, which I think is very libertarian and very meaningful and productive. In other words, it's not going to make our society worse. It's actually going to make it better. Like, this is not just me saying, oh, I got to uphold my libertarian principles. No, this is me saying, all right, let's think this through. What kind of society are we trying to build? Well, I'm trying to build a society that recognizes that, yeah, people might make some mistakes here and there, but if we can see a strong opportunity for a good functioning person, a person to become a good functioning member of this society, then let's give them the benefit of the doubt and let's assist them in that, right? That's what I want. And then also, I think this fits very well if you're a constitutionalist, which you should be. Every American should at least be a constitutionalist, unless you're a commie, unless you want communism, like literally want communism, or you literally want socialism, then you should be a constitutionalist at a bare minimum. And then libertarians, we should at least, I've said this before, we should at least be a constitutionalist, or we could be more than a constitutionalist. We could actually say, I want stricter limits on government, which is acceptable, and that would be very libertarian. So I'm coming at this and I'm saying, look, from every angle, my position here starts with, number one, due process and the Constitution, because that's what we have to work with. And it is a very beautiful document. It was drafted and very carefully, right? We have this system of checks and balances, and we're not really using it. So for me, when I look at this ruling, I read it and I say, I think that there's a potential due process issue here. Now, if a lawyer wants to come out and say, no, DL, here's where you're wrong, but good try, and honestly, not in a snarky way, like, hey, that was a really good attempt at understanding the law, that's great. I will accept that correction, because then going forward, I can implement that new knowledge as I go forward to try to communicate what I think a good society would look like, right? So this is why I'm pointing this out, because And you're not going to find, like, I tried to find some news stories about this. There's no news stories. Like, somebody just happened to, like, I guess they were digging into some of the legal documents that they could find, and they found this one, and they highlighted it, and they said, hey, I think there's a problem here with the supremacy clause. And I said, no, I don't think there's a problem with the supremacy clause, even though I'm not a lawyer, and I clearly got some things wrong, as some people pointed out on the internet, right? Because they pointed out, they said, yeah, if he misses his DUI court date, he's not going to have an automatic conviction. Okay, well, that really changes the nature of my argument in some sense. But in another sense, I still think there's a due process issue here. And if somebody can show me where there's no due process issue here, then I will back down and I'll say, okay, like it is what it is, right? I may not like the law. I may not like the fact that, and I don't, the fact that ICE is, in my opinion, taking the easy route and going to the courts, and they're waiting for people outside of the courtroom so they can be like, haha, we got you now. Like, that seems pretty shady, right? Because I want you to think about this for a second. I want you to think about what we're doing. We're telling people, hey, you need to follow the law. What do you think they're doing if they show up for the court date? They're following the law. Now, maybe they broke some portion of the law, but every American has broken the law. And every American, as far as I know, wants a little leniency when they break the law. Okay? So if it's a minor infraction, if it's an administrative infraction, right, then I'm willing to overlook that if we can see that, hey, you otherwise are the kind of person that we want in this country. Okay? Now, with the DUI conviction, or I'm sorry, with the DUI charge, right, I don't necessarily want people coming over here that are going to drink and drive. I do want people that, if there is some mitigating circumstance, the same as many of my fellow Americans have when they get a DUI, if there's a mitigating circumstance that says, hey, there was something out of the ordinary with this particular charge that would suggest that grace in this case is reasonable, well, then, yeah, I'm okay with that, because I want everybody to be treated equally under the law, whether you're a legal immigrant, an illegal immigrant, or a citizen. I want it to be applied equally. That is how we apply it equally. But then I'm also telling you about this because I don't want you to ever be afraid to go read a ruling or a piece of legislation and talk about it. Lawyers and judges get it wrong sometimes too, okay? I get it wrong. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a guy that reads. The more informed that we can become, the better our society will be. You can't become more informed if you don't at least at first read. You cannot correct any mistakes if you don't communicate them to somebody and allow people to say, oh, yeah, you actually got that wrong. A DUI charge doesn't result, in an automatic conviction if the person doesn't appear. That is something else happens. Oh, okay, great. Now I know. Now you know. And so we're a little bit more informed today, right? And that little bit more informed can go toward when we're talking about these cases. Because when Benjamin Franklin came out of the Constitutional Convention, he was asked, what, sir, have you given us? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. Okay? How do you keep your republic? Well, you have to be informed, right? That doesn't mean you have to know everything. Can't possibly know everything. Nobody knows everything. As Thomas Sowell likes to say, everyone is ignorant about something. You're always going to be ignorant about something. But if we're going to be engaged in this stuff, if you're going to be talking about it anyway, then you might as well spend the time to inform yourself just a little bit, right? Go read the rulings. Skim it over if you want to. Like, some of the rulings are kind of long. This particular one, I think, was like 10 pages, something like that, 13 pages. There's another ruling that puts a temporary restraining order on the Trump administration from sending troops into Chicago. And that one was like 50 pages, like 52 pages or something like that. And then the ruling from Oregon was like 31 pages. So I get it. You can't read everything, but maybe you read a few pages and just kind of, go through, find a section and say, I'm going to read this one section. Okay. And that way you kind of have some sense of what's going on in that particular case. So you can go, oh, okay, I see. Again, you don't have to research it in full. I don't research them in full, because if I did, I would read them, and then I would go and read all the relevant references that they have to other court cases. And I don't do that. Like, very rarely do I do that, okay? Because I'm just trying to present to you, from the LibertyDad perspective, how we become a more informed population. That's it. And then we can all have an argument, because I believe that every one of you can be very intelligent and weigh in on these topics in a meaningful way, right? We can do better than just yell, activist judges. Like, that doesn't mean anything. What are you talking about? How, like, do you know how many judges there are in this country? Which ones are activists? How do you determine if they're activist? Right now, it seems to be if the judge rules in a way that you don't like, then you call him activist. That's intellectually lazy. And we should all see that as, a dereliction of our civic duty, if you will. Like, you have no particular civic duty. You can just stay out of the affairs as you want and vote based on whatever, right? You have that right. But if you want to be more informed, if you want a better society, then follow this lead. Read some of the documents sometimes, and then talk about them. And then be willing to be corrected. If somebody makes a good case and say, hey, here's where you're wrong. Okay, great. Or maybe you know about something and you see somebody else is chiming in and they're chiming in with some ignorance. Well, don't be a jerk. Just go and correct them. Say, actually, as it turns out, you can't be, you don't get a conviction based on failure to appear, And so then that person is more informed. And then they can go and revise their argument if they're wise. Okay? But it starts with you, right? I've started it already. Now it starts with you. Now it continues with you, right? So every one of you go out and do this. Just from time to time, read a piece of legislation. Find one that's interesting to you. You don't have to read them all, right? Maybe just go and check out your city council. And if you hear about some topic where your city council is really, something's really happening, go read up on, okay, go watch maybe their city council meeting, scroll over, not scroll, but, move your, move the, go to the particular segment where they're talking about something specific that you're interested in, hear what they have to say, maybe read the actual legislation as it's been written, and then just try to understand it and try to have a conversation with other people. And that way you're a little bit more informed. What's up, buddy? Oh, yeah, we'll take care of that in a minute. Give me, yeah, you could wait, little buddy. Yeah, we'll get there, champ. All right. Yeah. Well, yes, you can sit there. Somebody has the day off of school. And since it's a school day, his tablet has a restriction until a certain time. Actually, his tablet has a restriction until like Thursday, so he has time to do his homework. That's beside the point. All right, so let's go to some comments here in the live chat. We'll see what you guys are saying. That's an old comment there, so we don't need that one up. Let's see here. Yes. Keith says, good morning, Liberty Livers. Yes, hopefully all of your livers are engaged in the active process of liberty by detoxifying you from all the communism. He actually meant lovers. But I thought it would be fun to say, to kind of try to make a joke, it's wah, wah. It's a dad joke. All right, let's see what else we got here. I'm under the impression the IRS can pull up in the party van and make you disappear. They might be. I don't know. I don't know if they have that kind of authority. They might. Let's see. Joe says, as someone who wants restrictions on immigrants from coming here, I'm making a point to celebrate Christopher Columbus Day because I have zero self-awareness or principles. All right. Do that. I think he's being sarcastic, folks, just for the record. So, and then, yes, that was Liberty's son joined in. So he's with me. He's going to be here all day today, all day tomorrow. He's got 2 days off. And he's really excited right now because he's been getting into chess. I played him last night. For a 6-year-old, he's pretty good. Just going to say that. Let's see. Any comments anywhere else? No other comments that I'm seeing. So we will go ahead and end the show for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you found it informative and inspiring. I know this is slightly deviating from my normal bill reviews where I actually do an actual piece of legislation, or maybe I talk about a ruling that's gaining a little bit more momentum and traction in the conversation publicly. But today, this happened to be one that I just chimed in on, and I was corrected, and I think it's okay. I don't mind being corrected because the next time around, I will not be corrected on that. I'll be corrected on something else. So I'm a little bit more wiser about how the law works than I was, say, Friday, right? And that's how we get better. So, but hey, whether you're watching live or you're going to watch me later, you're watching me later, come back in and drop a comment about your thoughts. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I need to offer another correction. Okay, I'm all about it. On this show, we're not going to pretend like we know everything. What we're going to do is we say, when I feel like I know something, we're going to speak about it. When somebody makes a correction and they can demonstrate that it is an actual correction, then yes, we will accept it. And then we will revise our argument. And then we will continue on, right? So feel free. If you're a lawyer and you're like, DL, you're totally missing a lot, then great. Throw me a comment in the comment section. Maybe I'll even talk about it. Or maybe you don't. Maybe I didn't miss anything. Maybe I got it all right. And maybe you just want to be promiscuous with praise. Totally. I'm willing. I'm willing on my day, on Liberty Dad Day, I'm willing to have all the praise that you want to dole on me. Okay? But with that, for now, I'm going to head on out, folks, and I will see you tomorrow. You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, because, you know, every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, The Message of Liberty, will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in and look forward to seeing you in the next episode.